This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Company. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durrant. Very excited to be here with you today. It finally warmed up here in Wyoming. I even got into a blue winged olive hatch. I think I mentioned that on the last episode. So things are looking up here, finally. I hope everybody's digging out from underneath the snow that the whole country got. And I hope you're comfy and ready to learn, because we've got just a ton of fun stuff to go over in today's show. We're going to be talking about fly rods. I love talking about fly rods. Yeah, it's a little, I've got a problem there. I should probably go see somebody about that. We're also going to talk about how to keep your flies floating, and we're finally going to have that conversation about Tenkara. So if any of that stuff sounds like things that you need to know about, definitely grab yourself a beverage, kick back, put your feet up, and just enjoy yourself for the next, 25, 30-ish minutes or so as we run through the show. Now, if you're driving while you listen to the podcast, like that's where I listen to all my podcasts on the drives, please don't put your feet up, because that would cause a serious hazard on the road. Oh, kidding aside, let's just jump right in. Oh, no, we can't jump right into things. I almost forgot before we do. Episode 16, that's 4 episodes from now. The entire VFC crew is going to be on the show. That's me, Alex, Berkeley. We're going to be talking. We're going to be answering questions, and we are going to be debuting some awesome new products that we have coming out. So definitely stay tuned for episode 16. That's one you're not going to want to miss. The new products that we've got coming out are fantastic. They're going to help you have a lot more success out on the water. So definitely stay tuned for that one. All right, now we can go right into the show. Keith from New Jersey, he wrote in to say, right at the very beginning of the show here, he wrote in to say, hey, Spencer, I have to tell your listeners that your comment about staying healthy as fishermen and outgrowing waders is a very true statement. My current situation is just that. The waders don't fit anymore, and I am reduced to using only hip waders at the moment. It just plain sucks. I got a long way to go, but it's a big incentive to get back into my waders. Thanks for the wake-up call and tight lines. Dude, Keith, first off, that's just awesome that you're willing to be that vulnerable, share that with us. I mean, this is community building right here, right? This is why fly fishing and the fly fishing community is so cool, because you meet people who are really willing to share a lot of themselves like that. And Keith, he didn't have to write in and share that little bit and admit to having some issues there as well, but that's awesome. Okay. Keep it up, dude. You got the motivation, just like you said, right? You can do it, and you're going to get that weight off. You're going to reward yourself with a brand new pair of waders. But seriously, Keith, thanks for being willing to share that with the audience. You're awesome. This is awesome. This is what it's all about right here, folks. Just helping each other out. And I did mention last week on the show, I was joking a little bit, but it's not very fun when you can't bend over in your waders to cinch up your wading boots or whatever. It's a real problem that a lot of us, have to deal with, because you go fishing for a couple hours and you stop and get wings and a pizza on the way home, or whatever your whatever your food and beverage of choice is. And it's so easy to just kind of lapse into those issues. So I don't want to spend too much more time on that, but Keith, we got your note. Really love that you're willing to go ahead and share that with all of us here. We appreciate it, and tight lines to you as well, man. Our first question today is from Chris out in Georgia. Chris out in Georgia writes, since you are the fly rod guru, what is good medium action fly rod? Looking for a 5-weight rod. I like the slower action rods and have been told several times that I am too laid back for fast action rods. I don't disagree. However, all you ever hear about is fast action rods, and companies come out with this. All you hear about is fast action rods that companies come out with that this is the faster of the fastest rod we have ever made. I keep waiting for them to be done with fast and move to supersonic maybe next year. Anyway, podcast is great and enjoy listening to it on my way to work each week. Keep up the good work. Chris, I love that line about supersonic fly rods. I might have to steal that and use it in an upcoming gear review. So if I do, Chris, I'll give you a hat tip in that one, I promise. But really good line. And I appreciate being dubbed the fly rod guru. Thank you very much. And appreciate you, your kind words there about the podcast as well. So it's interesting that you bring this particular topic up because it's something that I talk about a lot, especially being such a gear nut as I am and doing a lot of work with different fly rod companies and whatnot. I'm actually starting to see a shift kind of away from the faster rods to rods that are a lot more accurate and a lot more fun to cast. Like you look at any of the marketing materials for the new rod from Sage, for example. Fast really isn't in the description, kind of like you've seen in years past where it was focused on the fast, right? The Scott Radian from a few years ago, you remember their tagline for that rod was fast meets feel. So I think we're starting to see that shift away from fast a little bit, looking more on accuracy. That's kind of been the Orvis H3's calling card, right? It's the most accurate fly rod ever made. I'm sure we've seen those ads everywhere, and it is a wonderfully accurate rod. You know, I can vouch for that. I have 3 H3s, and they're wonderful, wonderful fishing tools for what they are. But some of the newest rods that I've cast lately are noticeably slower than the rods that came before them. I have no doubt that, well, I shouldn't say I have no doubt. I would be surprised if the new flagship rod from Orvis, when they finally do retire the H3, it's probably going to be a touch slower than the H3. The H3 is pretty fast stick, which is great, but probably going to be a little bit slower. Take the new Sage R8 core, for example, though. It's actually slower than the Sage X, which was the one that came right before it, the big flagship rod. And it is a lot slower than the Sage 1. The Sage 1, I know a lot of folks felt like it was kind of a broomstick. That's a common derogatory term you will hear thrown towards the one. I don't think it was very fair. It was a very stiff, very fast rod, but it was a very good rod as well. But I bring that up because with the brand new from Sage, right, top of the line, this is their first one that retailed for more than $1,000. You would expect to see that very, very fast. We're building the fastest rod ever, supersonic, right? Well, not quite, but we're not quite there. It's actually slowed up a little bit, and I think we're going to see the pendulum in the fly rod building community kind of swing a little bit more back to center. I don't think we're going to see the predominantly medium action rods kind of run the market the way that we did years ago, but I think we're going to see stuff that's not as focused on being fast. So that's kind of my 2 cents, a little bit of industry insight there into the fly rod world. As far as a good moderate action 5-weight, I'm going to go ahead and plug the Fly Flinger here from VFC right in here, and I'll leave a link to it in the description so you can take a look at it. Now, if anybody has the Fly Flinger, you probably noticed on the rod tube itself, it says fast action 9-foot 5-weight rod. And I think it's a little bit mislabeled because it's a fast rod, but compared to a lot of other things that are on the market, I would put it in kind of that medium fast category. It's not like vintage graphite slow, but it's not top of the line, super quick, really high line speed fly rod either. I think it's a really good happy medium. It's right in that moderate ballpark. And that's one of the reasons that I like this rod quite a bit. Having fished as many fly rods as I have, I really like using the Fly Flinger, our VFC rod, because it works, and I don't really have to think about the fact that I'm using it. All right. An example, I was out on the Green River in, I think we were floating in Utah. It was me, Alex, and Berkeley, the whole crew here at VFC. And we're floating down the river, and we had probably 8 rods rigged up in the boat. And we were just, we had different dry flies rigged, so we could just swap and fish. And we had a bunch of fly flingers rigged and then some other rods that we were playing with. And I remember throughout the day, I could just reach down, grab a rod, and didn't even have to think about it because most of them were fly flingers. I could just reach down, pick it up, and fish it. I knew what it was going to do. I didn't really have to think through and, try and make the rod work, which some rods you have to, but the fly flingers they just pick up and they work. And that's why I really like them, because I don't have to put a lot of thought into actually using them. The fly flinger definitely flexes deeper into its midsection than other rods. You can really feel it load out at distance, which I like. It kind of slows up real beautifully at about 50, 60 feet, and it slows up just wonderfully. It's just a very pleasant rod to fish with at that distance. And it's $175, and our warranty is awesome. So I know, here I am, promoting one of our rods, but I'm not just saying it because it's the rod that we make. If I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't tell you guys, hey, check it out. And I wouldn't be telling you, Chris, to go look at it if you want something a little bit slower. So I would recommend that. Now, if you enjoy really slow action rods, take a look at some bamboo or fiberglass. All right. I love fishing bamboo. In fact, I love it so much that I actually started building my own bamboo rods. Sold a few as well. They're a ton of fun. If you're interested in really, really slow stuff, you owe it to yourself to at least go cast a couple of bamboo rods, because that's a casting and fishing experience that is hard to match on any other material. So hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully we had a fun little chat about what's going on in the fly rod industry. I could sit here and talk gear all day long, and I promise we are going to have some dedicated gear episodes of the podcast coming up in the future, trying to map those out, figure out where we want to do them, but we'll have them. All right. I promise you guys will get to listen to me pontificate all about these things. And hopefully you enjoy it. So, cause I enjoy talking about it, but Chris, thank you very much for that question. I appreciate it a lot. You've heard the saying before, there's no such thing as a stupid question. As a teacher, I tell my students that all the time, but it's really hard to believe it because sometimes it feels like, yes, there are stupid questions, and it can be uncomfortable to ask a question that could potentially make you feel like an idiot. Nobody wants to be in that situation, and that's very understandable. That is one of the reasons that we started this podcast. You are able to ask questions and get them answered in a place where, you don't even have to use your real name. You could just put in Bucky or Gunner from Wyoming, and no one's going to know it's you asking these questions. So if you've got a question about fly fishing that you've been too afraid to ask, maybe your fishing buddies or somebody at a fly shop, where you don't want them to look at you like you're stupid or to make fun of you forever for it, go ahead and ask it here. This is a place where you can ask your questions, get them answered, and you're going to get to hear it in a fun, entertaining way. So please click the link in the podcast description to submit a question so we can keep this wonderful podcast moving forward. Next question comes to us. Steven from Oregon writes in and says, doing some late afternoon dry fly fishing in the high desert with number 18 and 20 BWOs. The water is low and slow, and my leader, an 11-foot 5X leader, is sinking and pulling my flies. What can I do? Steven, you're doing some of my absolute favorite fishing. I love throwing blue-winged olives, especially this time of year. It's a very technical kind of fishing, but it can be probably among the most rewarding. Some of the best blue-winged days I've ever had were late February, early March out in Oregon, actually. So I think Steven and I might have fished the same waters. I didn't mean for that to sound so creepy. I'm sorry, Steven. Oh, well, let's just go ahead and answer your question then, shall we? So, you've got a couple of options here, all right? First off, make sure that you're fishing with a monofilament leader if you're not doing that already. And if you're adding any tippet to the end of that 11-foot leader to go down to 6X for those really small bugs, definitely don't use fluorocarbon, use monofilament there as well. We did an entire episode actually about mono versus fluoro. So if you want to learn more about the big differences there, you can go ahead and listen to that episode. It's episode 2, I believe. But the gist of that is that while fluoro is great since it's very invisible and it has higher strength in some areas than monofilament does, it's tough to use as a dry fly leader because it sinks. Mono floats. And mono's got a longer track record. Mono has a longer track record, I got it out that time, of success because it was used for years and years and years very successfully before fluorocarbon ever got introduced. So that's the route I would go if I were you. I see a lot of folks make that mistake of using fluorocarbon for their dry fly leaders because they're looking at the invisibility aspect of it, which is very tempting, especially as a dry fly angler, to want to do that. But you don't have to. You don't have to use fluorocarbon for your dry fly leaders. You don't have to worry that the monofilament's going to spook the fish. In situations like this, when the water is really low and slow and clear, the fish are going to get spooked. If you fart the wrong direction, the fish are going to spook, all right? They sit there, they look at your fly, they count the tail feathers, or they see that you used hackle fibers instead of Coke de Leon fibers for the tail, and they're like, huh, well, this idiot doesn't know what he's doing, and they swim away, all right? Fish have a million reasons to ignore your fly, and unless you're using, like, rope for your tippet, you don't need to worry about that spooking the fish. There's going to be a lot of other things that spook the fish before the tippet will. So definitely use monofilament. Don't be afraid to use monofilament in that instance at all. So if you're not doing that already, please make sure that you're doing it. I know that will make a big difference. Just this last summer, actually, I was up in the mountains here in Wyoming fishing. This was before the flood killed all of our fish in Wyoming, mind you, because remember, we don't have any fish in Wyoming. They all drowned. Okay, there was a big flood. All of our fish drowned. So don't plan a fishing vacation to Wyoming. Just go to Oregon or Montana or Idaho or Utah. Just go to Colorado too, and New Mexico. Just skip Wyoming. You know, don't come here to be disappointed. Anyways, I'm up there fishing, and it was a little stream, catching some cutthroat and fishing dry flies. My dry flies kept doing the same thing. They kept sinking, and I was getting really frustrated. Couldn't figure out why they were sinking either because I ginked them up with plenty of floating. And then come to find out the spool of tippet I was using was fluorocarbon and not monofilament. So that explained everything that I needed to know at that point. So it happens. But as soon as you make that switch over to mono, you'll see a big improvement in how well your flies float. So in that vein, though, make sure that you're adding some floatant to your leader as well. I always grease my leader up with floatant when I put it on my flies. I usually grease up, 3-4 feet of the leader as well. It helps the leader float, helps your tippet float, and you can always reapply that throughout the day. That's not like a one-time thing. So that'll help out a lot as well. Finally, make sure that you're checking the tip of your fly line. If it's old and cracked, then it's not going to float very well, right? The water's going to get in through the coating, and the braided core is going to absorb all that water and want to sink. So if you clean your fly lines regularly, you'll be able to get rid of dirt and prolong the life of your fly line and hopefully help it from not cracking as much at the tip. I actually know folks who will just cut the tip off of a bad fly line and keep fishing with it, and you can certainly do that. But if the bad section's like more than a foot long, your line's not going to cast right because the tip kind of levels out a little bit on the fly line so that you don't have a big splash when the fly line lays down on the water. And so if you just keep cutting fly line back, eventually you're going to get to where the line's the heaviest and it's going to splash and your presentation's going to be all off. So, if more than that tip of the fly line is bad, then just buy a new fly line. It's worth it at that point. And the modern fly lines are really good from a durability standpoint. I really enjoy what they're doing with them these days. So, Steven, try those tips out. Let me know if any of them worked. If not, let me know, though. And we'll see what we can do to help you get your flies afloating. And we are down to the last question for the show today. And this one comes to us from Mark from Kansas City. Is that Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri? I don't know. Nobody's ever explained that to me. How can the city be in two states? It bothers me. Okay, I got that out of my system. It's like in Utah, there's Wendover, and then there's West Wendover, because Wendover is right on the line between Utah and Nevada. And as soon as you step over the line, you can gamble in Nevada. You can't gamble in Utah, so if that's your thing. But it's like, no, you're one city. You get to be in one state, all right? Lines exist for a reason, okay? All right, I get a little worked up over dumb things sometimes. So Mark from Kansas City wrote in, and Mark, you're not dumb. I know how that sounded, but you're not. Do any of you guys do Tenkara trout fishing? I have been a traditional fly fisherman for 30 years and just tried Tenkara last year. Had a little success in Rocky Mountain National Park, but only fished for a few hours. Flies are a little different, so I'm wondering if traditional flies work better. Great question there, Mark. None of us here at VFC do any Tenkara fishing, but that's certainly not an indictment on the technique. I want to be really clear here because some folks take it when I say that I don't like Tenkara. They take it as me saying, "Oh, well, you must hate Tenkara then. If you don't like it, you hate it. You think it's not even fishing." No, that's not what I said. I've had this argument on social media before, if you can't tell. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean that I hate it, right? It's like, it's like the weird, awkward flavor of wings at your local wing joint or pineapple on a pizza, right? I don't like pineapple on my pizza. I don't hate it. Okay. I just don't like it. Right. That's kind of how I feel about Tenkara fishing. I don't like it. I mean, if that was the only fishing to do, I'd go ahead and do it, right? If pineapple pizza is the only pizza, I'm not going to say no, it's pizza, for crying out loud. But, I'll still eat it. But the same thing with Tenkara fishing. All right. And for those of you who don't know, all right, before we get into the weeds here with more Tenkara stuff, Tenkara fishing is a style of fishing that originated over in Japan. You use a very, very long rod, 12, 13 foot long rod with a completely level line. There's no reel. The line attaches to the tip of the rod itself. And so you have a fixed line, a fixed length of line, and your long rod, and you use the extra length of the rod and then the line itself to present those flies to the fish. So that's kind of an overview. There's no reel. It's a very simplistic way to fish. And there's a lot of folks who just love it. And that's awesome. I mean that. Joking aside, I'm not here to bag on Tenkara at all. And none of us are. If you have to go out of your way to make fun of the way that somebody fishes, then, go do something else. All right. The only people who deserve to be made fun of for how they fish are the people using garlic rainbow power bait. Okay. And I was one of those guys one long time ago. And obviously that was a joke. If you can't tell, it's perfectly fine to use garlic rainbow power bait. Okay. Anyways, we're going to get the social media armies after this episode, I guess. I just personally prefer the traditional style of fly fishing. I like a reel. I like being able to fly cast. And that's all I want to say about Tenkara. Now, if you're interested about Tenkara at all, let us know. We can definitely do some articles. We do something kind of explain Tenkara more, because I know a lot of folks are really interested in this stuff. And it's a really cool way to fish. Watching if you have the chance to watch somebody catch a really big fish on a Tenkara rod, it's really interesting to watch because there's no reel. And so you just sit there and the whole time you're thinking they're going to lose that fish, and then they don't, and they get it in the net. And it's a really cool thing to watch. So definitely, look up some YouTube videos of people catching big fish on Tenkara, because it's pretty interesting how they land those, just the different techniques. But as far as the flies go, traditional Tenkara flies, they're called kibari. They are tied with backwards hackle. All right. So that's why they're a little bit different here, Mark. But you don't have to use traditional Tenkara flies on a Tenkara rod. A lot of the guys I know who do Tenkara, who that's their thing, they use regular trout flies all the time. So I don't think there's a case of like Kabari are better than traditional trout flies or vice versa. It's really in the technique because the Kabari flies are meant to be fished a little bit differently. So it really comes down to technique, but certainly don't be afraid to use standard or regular old trout flies on a Tenkara rod. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with Tenkara fishing at all. All right, just gotta say that again because it's interesting. People get very defensive about this sort of thing sometimes. But I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'd rather see somebody out there enjoying themselves, respecting the resource, and having fun than anything else. So as long as you're doing that, never gonna have any issues. And I think most people who fish feel the same way. So wonderful questions. Thank you to everybody who wrote in and gave us your questions. Remember, there's a link in the podcast description. You can click, get your questions answered by me, maybe mocked a little bit because, I got to keep the jokes coming, right? We got to be engaging here. We got to have good, engaging content all the time. Thank you to everybody for listening to this show, listening to all the shows that you have. This is the show's actually doing a lot better than I expected it to this early on. So very, very appreciative of all of that. And remember, stay tuned for episode 16. You do not want to miss the whole VFC crew together and new product drops. So set an alert, whatever you got to do. Remember episode 16. And until next week, tight lines, everybody.